What is the most up thing a person you know has done? Story 1. He had an affair with his son's long-term girlfriend, his son's first love. He told his son about it as if it was no big deal. Later, he shared the story at work, calling his son a bit dramatic for being upset. We watched his life unravel as both his children cut him out completely. He found out he had become a grandfather through an email from his older daughter. No pictures, no further communication. As shocking as sleeping with his son's girlfriend was, it was just one of many terrible things he had done. Overall, he was a toxic person. Story 2. OMG, once I had a girlfriend visit me for 4 days at my grandmother's house, which was packed with family. It was during the summer while we were both in college. Right after she arrived, we went for a walk, and she broke up with me. I was stunned, thinking, wait, what? What was I supposed to do with her for 4 days around my family? I tried everything to change her mind or at least get an explanation. It was so sudden. Eventually, she admitted that on the way to my house, she sat next to a woman on a train who convinced her to end things. The woman apparently told her to trust her feelings, and that was that. She never gave me a real reason. Eventually, she changed her mind. We had a great weekend, and we ended up dating for another 6 months or so. When she broke up with me again, I just said, yeah, fine. I think she wanted me to fight for her again. For a few months after, she seemed a little obsessed with me, but I was done. Story 3. There was a decomposing dead cat stuck between a fence and a wall next to the gym at my school. If physical education was our first class, we had to wait in front of the gym until someone fetched the keys. One day, my friend Jason went to get the keys and left his bag behind. The class bully Toby used 2 sticks to pick up the dead cat, opened Jason's bag, and stuffed the cat inside. Jason didn't notice until we were in the locker room. When he opened his bag, he saw the dead cat, screamed, and dropped the bag. The cat fell apart in a soupy mess of rotten insides crawling with maggots splashed all over the floor. Class was immediately canceled, and a cleaning company had to come in to disinfect the locker room. Story 4. My aunt and uncle are wealthy farmers who have spent decades building new branches of their business for their kids to run and eventually inherit. One of their major expansions was moving from simply raising beef cattle to handling the butchering and selling of the meat themselves. They built a stunning $1 million butcher shop and sent my cousin's husband to butcher school to get certified and manage the operations, while my cousin handled the bookkeeping. Neither of them did anything to earn this opportunity. They were essentially handed a golden ticket. Things took a turn a few years later when my aunt and uncle started receiving complaints about how the business was being run. They assumed it was a motivation issue and offered my cousin's husband a raise, despite him and my cousin already earning enough to afford $1 million home. His response, however, raised red flags. He sarcastically claimed he already made plenty. Suspicious, my aunt and uncle reviewed the bookkeeping records after hours and discovered significant discrepancies. When the husband found out, he stormed over to their house, screaming in rage. Eventually, it was revealed that he and my cousin had embezzled over $1 million by manipulating the books. Though they were kicked out of the family business, they faced no legal consequences and even received a hefty buyout. Since then, they've had minimal contact with the family. My aunt and uncle have tried to reconcile to see their grandchildren, but have been repeatedly rejected. It's mind-blowing that they were handed everything and still threw it all away. They would have inherited the business, but greed got the better of them. Story 5. I was casually dating a woman who started pressuring me for S early in the relationship. After several months of non-intercourse fooling around, I finally decided to go for it. The plan was dinner at her place, followed by spending the night. After dinner and a few bottles of wine, things heated up. Then, oh no, the condom broke. She immediately said, don't worry, I'm on the pill. I responded, fine, show me. She couldn't or wouldn't produce the pills or a prescription. Something didn't sit right, so I checked her trash. That's when I found a condom wrapper with a pinhole in it. When I confronted her, she admitted to poking holes in the condoms. She confessed that she'd had a daughter who tragically committed suicide and believed that God owed her another child. That was the end of the relationship, or so I thought. Fast forward 20 years, and I now have a son whom I won custody of when he was 4. He's currently an engineering student at the University of Utah. His mother owes me $600K in unpaid child support, but I'll never see a dime of it. What I've learned is that family courts don't favor men, no matter the circumstances. Story 6. Back in the day, a kid I knew was on Xanax and decided to steal one of his neighbor's SUVs. We lived in the kind of southern neighborhood where people would leave their keys in their cars, so this wasn't as difficult as it sounds. I I was walking to a friend's house when he pulled up in the SUV and offered me a ride. I was pretty out of it myself, so I didn't question it and got in. His family owned multiple cars, so I assumed it was one of theirs. Once inside, I asked whose car it was, and that's when he admitted he'd stolen it. I was stunned, tried not to touch anything, and got out as soon as we reached my destination. About 30 minutes later, I heard fire trucks and police sirens down the road. We started calling him and his mom, but no one knew where he was. The next day, we finally got in touch. After dropping me off, he'd gone off-roading in the SUV and left it parked on train tracks. A train hit it, causing a fire and complete chaos. He hid out in the woods that night to avoid getting caught. I can't imagine what his neighbors told their insurance company. Story 7. A close friend of my mother's, whom we'll call Maureen, was having an affair with a married man named Patrick. Patrick's wife, Caroline, was mentally unstable and suffered deeply from depression due to Patrick's abusive behavior and constant infidelity. Despite his history as a serial cheater, Maureen believed it was true love and was convinced they would both divorce their spouses and be together. Patrick, however, was in no rush to make it official. The relationship persisted because Patrick and Maureen were both nasty individuals who took pleasure in tormenting Caroline. Patrick gaslit her constantly, while Maureen hovered around their lives just enough to be noticed but not caught, further feeding Caroline's paranoia. Because of Caroline's mental health history, no one believed her when she tried to voice her suspicions. Patrick had convinced everyone he had changed, which left Caroline looking unhinged. This psychological torment continued for over a year. One evening, Maureen called my mom in shock, saying Caroline had taken her own life. My mom rushed to her side, expecting to find Maureen in tears or consumed with guilt. Instead, she found Maureen laughing about it and excitedly waiting for Patrick to come over. My mom, not exactly a saint herself, finally had enough and confronted Maureen before leaving in disgust. The tragic details came out in the following days. Caroline had hanged herself in her garage. She had carefully planned the timing to prevent her children from finding her, but her teenage daughter unexpectedly came home early and discovered her body. In the months that followed, Maureen divorced her husband and moved in with Patrick. She even put the house they bought in her name. Predictably, Patrick began cheating on her, ghosted her, and eventually left. Maureen's teenage sons initially stayed in contact, but when Patrick began turning her against her younger son, both boys moved in with their father and cut her off completely. Maureen was left alone, drowning in debt from the house Patrick abandoned. While Patrick's sociopathic manipulation is undeniable, Maureen's behavior throughout was equally despicable. She celebrated another woman's death and enabled Patrick's abuse. In the end, her misery was a direct result of her own actions. I can't muster an ounce of sympathy for her. Story 8. When my nephew was 6 months old, he's 11 now and thriving, obsessed with Fortnite like most kids his age, he had a SIDS episode. He stopped breathing, and the only reason he survived was that my mom obsessively checked on him while babysitting. She and my brother managed to revive him, and they rushed him to the hospital. Understandably, my mom was shaken to her core. Finding her first grandchild turning blue was a nightmare. Seeking emotional support, she called her sister. Her sister's response? Well, you just need to get Satan out of your life. That was the final straw. For years, I had told my mom her family was emotionally and mentally abusive, but she always brushed it off. It took this heartless comment for her to finally believe me and cut them off completely. Even now, after my mom's death, those same relatives have the audacity to act like they don't know why she stopped talking to them. The lack of self-awareness is staggering. Story 9. A co-worker of mine, a 21-year-old guy, was just a year or two younger than me. He struggled with severe depression, though he masked it with a dark sense of humor. Most of the time, his jokes about killing himself seemed like edgy humor, not something to take seriously. None of us realized how much he was hurting. His only anchor was his girlfriend, but she wanted to break up because her parents disapproved of him. One night, he sat in his car, crying and begging her not to leave. When he realized the relationship was truly over, he called her parents and asked them to join the call. Only the mother picked up. He blamed both her and her parents for his declining mental health, ending the call with chilling final words, "I hope this scars you all forever." Then he shot himself in the head while still on the line. Afterward, we learned that his wealthy but emotionally absent parents had neglected him for years. They gave him money but left him alone for long stretches of time, leaving him isolated and unsupported. His family, ashamed of his actions, refused to write an obituary or hold a funeral. It was haunting to see someone who had been part of our daily lives just disappear. Even now, it feels surreal. Story 10. A woman I met in rehab was the end-of-life caretaker for her aunt, who had terminal cancer. Unfortunately, she was also a drug addict. She stole her aunt's pain medication and lied to everyone, claiming her aunt didn't want visitors or to be moved to hospice. Her aunt passed away alone and in severe pain. Also, this woman could continue getting high. Another man in rehab was awaiting trial for raping and assaulting a woman. His lawyer somehow got him into rehab instead of jail, leveraging his status as a veteran. Tragically, the victim took her own life before the trial began, so all charges were dropped. The man came back from court praising God for giving him another chance at life, bragging that he had learned not to leave marks next time. Other men in the program congratulated him, and they would openly discuss how to commit similar crimes and get away with them. It was absolutely disgusting. Story 11. I work for a gardening company that sees workers come and go. One guy, Mike, yes, that's his real name, built a relationship with a customer named Wilfred, not his real name, a 90-year-old WW2 veteran who was completely blind. Wilfred had an old BMW in his garage that he treasured, even though it hadn't moved in decades. He often told stories about driving his wife to town in it during their younger days. Mike convinced Wilfred to let him take the car home to fix it up, promising to bring it back once it was restored. Wilfred even agreed to pay Mike a good sum for his work. Instead, Mike drove the car straight to a scrapyard and sold it for scrap value. Every time Wilfred asked about the car, Mike lied, stringing him along. Despite this betrayal, Mike kept his job. It was one of the most revolting acts I've ever witnessed, stealing from a blind, elderly man. Story 12. A bartender I knew was well-liked by everyone. He was charming, good with customers, and had a long-term girlfriend who was kind and friendly. Everyone thought he was a great guy. One day he lost his phone. Someone found it, tried to identify the owner by checking photos, and ended up turning it over to the police. Rumors started swirling that he'd been charged with statutory rape. At first, everyone thought it must be a misunderstanding. It wasn't. The bartender had been molesting his girlfriend's 6- or 7-year-old daughter. He had evidence of the abuse on his phone, including child pornography he used to groom her by convincing her it was normal. He even borrowed my Xbox, claiming he wanted to play games with her brother, but it turned out he used it to distract the boy while he abused the girl. After the truth came out, his ex-girlfriend moved away with her kids to escape the scrutiny. The girl's biological father was in prison for assault, but I wouldn't be surprised if he eventually seeks revenge. Looking back, I remembered a joke the bartender told me at a trivia night, a horrifying joke about abusing children. At the time, I brushed it off as sick humor, but now I'll never forget it. I hope someday I can. Story 13. A man started a gay nightclub that became successful enough for him to sell shares to investors in hopes of expanding. However, nightclubs are a trendy and volatile business, and soon the club began to fail. When several investors demanded their money back, he murdered 3 of them. He's now serving a life sentence in New York. This all happened in the 1990s. I'd visited the club a few times while on business in the city, unaware of the dark events tied to it. The FBI later contacted me because my sister, who had invested a small amount in the business, was listed in his address book. She testified during the trial as the murderer had approached friends for his fraudulent schemes. Interestingly, while this case has been covered in true crime shows, most omit the details about the nightclub being gay or the associated toy shop, framing it solely as a financial fraud turned murder case. Story 14. A friend of mine was in her final year of university. She had strong grades and had secured a dream internship that was almost guaranteed to lead to an amazing job. Everything seemed to be falling into place. On the day she had 3 finals back-to-back, her parents faked her younger brother's death. Their reasoning? They wanted to see if she cared more about her family or her career. In panic and grief, she dropped everything, bought plane tickets, and flew across the country, all while trying to arrange deferred exams. One professor who taught 2 of her classes demanded a death certificate, which of course she couldn't provide since her brother was alive and well. As a result, she couldn't graduate that semester and lost her dream internship. Although she graduated half a year later and found a good job, it wasn't nearly as great as the one she'd missed out on. Story 15. Some people are bitter when their kids have the potential to achieve more than they did. In high school, my mom took an early retirement and then mysteriously couldn't find work right after I got my first job. From then on, I worked to pay our utility bills and even covered full rent on a 3-bedroom house at times. Anytime I tried to say no, she guilted me with, "Think of your younger sibling. They need you." She even tried to get me to open a joint checking account with her, which I thankfully refused. When I went to college, my parents borrowed a $1,000 deposit from me, claiming it was to prevent my sibling from ending up homeless. But when I came home that summer, they'd rented a massive house near a lake complete with extra bedrooms. I still believed I was helping my sibling and doing the right thing. Once my sibling moved out and my mom couldn't use them to manipulate me anymore, she miraculously found 2 jobs, one in retail and one with USPS. She'd clearly never been trying to find work. It was easier to exploit me. She never repaid the money she took from me, and our relationship has been strained ever since. One year, at a friend's advice, I tried to make amends by visiting for the holidays. The moment I set my bag down, my mom said, "You'd pay $100 to stay in a hotel, so you should pay us to stay here." That was her response to my olive branch. I've realized she probably felt trapped by her own religious upbringing, where having children was expected, but she targeted me relentlessly, and I'll never fully understand why. It was insane. Story 16. My bipolar alcoholic brother has a long history of beating and choking his girlfriends. After our mom died, he moved in with my elderly father and refused to leave. My dad, out of misplaced loyalty to his son, wouldn't press charges, even as my brother's violent tendencies escalated. On separate occasions, my brother broke my dad's finger, nearly broke his leg, and threw a knife that hit my dad handle first, leaving a gash in his head. If the blade had hit, it could have killed him. Despite this, no charges were ever filed. Eventually, my brother's arrests and other troubles caught up with him, landing him in jail and rehab. He moved out and got his own place, and I relocated my dad closer to me to ensure his safety. My dad now has a safe and peaceful environment to live in, but my brother has already started talking about moving into my dad's old house for free, since no one is living there anymore. He's a total degenerate, and everyone has had to move away just to feel safe. It's heartbreaking what my dad endured because he couldn't bring himself to cut ties. Story 17. My uncle Aaron is the worst person I know, an absolute piece of garbage. His cycle of destruction is so predictable it's almost a script. He charms women, convinces them he's changed or is some kind of victim, gets them pregnant, and then abandons them once the baby is born. When he's ready to leave, he's always desperate for money, so he targets family members to con or steal from. He's stolen my dad's identity, opened credit cards in his name, and even attempted to drain his bank account. He once took out a business loan with his first son, stole all the money, and disappeared. Sometimes he goes back to the women after the baby is born, manipulating them into sleeping with him again, just to twist the knife. He's been in and out of jail his entire life, and honestly, I wish he'd just stay there. Every few years, strangers reach out to us, claiming to be part of Aaron's extended family. They'll say something like, "Hi, I'm Aaron's kid with so-and-so, and I want to meet my relatives." And we're always like, "Who the hell is so-and-so? Oh, you hate Aaron?" Yeah, same here. Welcome to the family. To my knowledge, Aaron has 5 families and 3 sons, all named Aaron Jr. from different mothers. Not a single one of his kids has been raised by him. He's currently missing, but we all know the pattern. He'll reappear soon with some woman, pregnant or already with child, claiming he's turned his life around and trying to scam money from someone. Aaron, you're a terrible human being. You suck. Story 18. I haven't spoken to my biological mother in over 10 years. She was on the run for not paying child support. When I turned 18, social services, my dad, and she finally discussed what she owed. The first words out of her mouth were, "She's 18. I don't have to pay anything." My dad and stepmom didn't know I was in the room when she said that. I didn't have much love for her before, but after hearing that, I had none. This wasn't the first time she hurt me. When I was a kid, she let her boyfriend drug and molest me and my sister while she had custody. If I ever told her what he did, she'd force me to take cold showers as punishment. I spent most of my childhood fending for myself and my sister. She even made us steal from stores to support her. On top of that, she filled my head with lies, telling me my dad, who loved us more than anything, hated me and wished I was dead. She's done many awful things, but these stand out the most. A pile of dog crap has been more productive and loving than she ever was. Story 19. My mother is a murderer and one of the most monstrous people I've ever known. She killed my father by spiking his morning Mountain Dew with crushed OxyContin and later killed her next partner by shooting him in the head with a shotgun. He bled out over a heating vent, requiring the ductwork in the house to be replaced because of the accumulated blood. That's not even the worst of it. My mother ran an adult foster care home and preyed on elderly residents with few or no family members. She convinced some of them to include her in their wills and retirement funds. Many died under mysterious circumstances. After her second prison stint, I discovered boxes of fraudulent paperwork filled with forgeries and lies. But her worst crime wasn't the murders. She hated my baby sister because she was the apple of my father's eye. My mother, out of jealousy, hired a registered S offender as a groundskeeper for her estate, knowing full well his background. She flew him in from Arkansas and gave him a trailer on the property. Over the course of a year, she regularly dropped off my sister, who was only 10 years old, to be repeatedly raped by this man. He videotaped the abuse, and the police later found those tapes on his hard drive. My mother even brainwashed my sister into thinking she was in a special relationship with this predator. My mother destroyed our family. She received millions from life insurance after my father's death because she managed to avoid charges, having his death ruled suspicious instead of a homicide. Despite killing her next partner and being caught attempting to murder again, she served only short prison sentences, thanks to her wealth and ability to hire top-tier lawyers. She even scammed welfare and housing programs as well as trafficked opiates. She is now married to an evangelical preacher and lives about an hour from me. I haven't spoken to her in over a decade, and I never will. My sister, now a trans man living in NYC, has become a therapist helping the LGBTQ+ community. My brother is a Unitarian Universalist pastor and a community leader in the Midwest. Despite everything, they've turned their pain into compassion and are making the world a better place. They're my heroes. As for me, I'm still processing everything, and sharing this story feels like a necessary catharsis. My mother's actions have left scars that will never fully heal. Story 20. My buddy grew up with a single mom and a younger sister named Bella, who had a different dad. Bella's father dated their mom for a while before they split because he was a total jerk. There was this kid at school whose dad was friends with Bella's father. This kid started hanging out with my buddy a lot, playing video games at his house, drinking with us, and acting like a good friend. About 6 months later, my buddy's mom ended up in court because Bella's dad wanted custody. To everyone's shock, this kid was called in as a character witness. He told the court that my buddy's mom was a terrible parent who smoked weed constantly and didn't take care of her kids. I know her personally, and she's an amazing mom who does everything for her kids. As a single parent, I have immense respect for her. We later found out that this kid's dad had instructed him to become friends with my buddy, just to gather information and testify against his mom. It was one of the most disgusting betrayals I've ever seen. The good news is, even with that testimony, Bella's dad was such a jerk that the court still granted custody to my buddy's mom. We all still hang out now, and it's crazy to think how close Bella came to being taken away because of those lying scumbags. Story 21. During my freshman year of college, I occasionally bumped into an older student, probably a sophomore or junior, in my dorm. We made small talk a few times, especially in the laundry room, and even added each other on Snapchat, but that was the extent of our interaction. Halfway through the year, there was a fatal stabbing in a dorm building next to mine. The victim was a student, and they caught the perpetrator the next day. When they showed the killer on the news, I was shocked to realize it was the guy I knew from my dorm. It turned out to be a targeted crime. The killer knew the victim. Still, it shook me to my core to know I'd casually interacted with someone capable of murder. He was later sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Story 22. After my father passed away, my former stepmother drained his bank account within minutes. When we confronted her, she returned what she hadn't already spent on Amazon purchases. We froze his accounts, but there was evidence she'd tried to withdraw more afterward, likely intending to overdraft the account and leave my sister and me with the debt. We're currently trying to sell his house, which she wrecked before we managed to evict her. On top of that, we're still struggling to pay off the mortgage. To make matters worse, she claimed to be pregnant just a week after his death, despite them being together for over a decade without ever having a child. My sister asked for proof, and the ultrasound photo she sent turned out to be a $30 fake from a website with edited details. We haven't heard from her in about 5 months, but I'm sure she's scheming something. Story 23. My wife's 69-year-old mom was shacking up with multiple men, while her husband, my wife's stepdad, was dying in the hospital from a brain tumor. She refused to visit him unless my wife prompted her, and even then we had to drive her. During her rare visits, she spent the entire time asking how she was supposed to pay the bills when he died, while he drifted in and out of consciousness. Before he died, she was already an incredibly abusive and selfish person, but her behavior during his illness was absolutely appalling. After his death, she refused to help plan the funeral, leaving it all to my wife, who was already struggling with the loss and just needed some love and support from her mom. At the funeral and wake, she played the grieving widow for sympathy, despite having never worked a day in her life or contributed to their household expenses. Now she tells everyone how badly she was treated by her late husband and how he left her destitute. I've always disliked her, but after this, I absolutely hate her. I only tolerate her for my wife's sake. Story 25. During my senior year of high school in northern Michigan, I lived in a cabin with my now wife near 3 other cabins. My best friend lived in one of them. One day, he broke into all the cabins and stole random items. The tenants called the cops, and a few days later, he was picked up in town. While in the back of the police car, he kicked out the window, got into the driver's seat, and tried to run over 3 officers. He managed to escape and fled to Georgia. In Georgia, he met a girl and moved in with her and her aunt. For reasons I'll never fully understand, he and his girlfriend killed her aunt by strangling and beating her, then buried her in the backyard. Afterward, they returned to Michigan. He was arrested there for his crimes, and during the investigation, the murder in Georgia came to light. He was extradited back to Georgia, where he is now serving life without parole. His girlfriend received 15 years. This all happened in 2002. Story 25. My mother killed my grandfather and stole his estate. After convincing his wife of 2 months to have him admitted to the hospital, she lied to the doctor, who placed him on dialysis. This caused a heart attack and he died. She then locked his house, sold the business he and I had run together for 18 years for scrap, and used the money to buy a house for herself. She told the family there wasn't enough money to pay out the inheritance specified in his will. She tried to cover up a brokerage account meant for my daughter by convincing the financial advisor to lie about its existence. Then she attempted to transfer the account into her name. To top it off, she changed the locks on my house, sold it while my family was still living there, and called the police on me for breaking in when I tried to retrieve some belongings. Story 26. When I was 18, I decided to try rebuilding my relationship with my father after years of estrangement. Things were going okay until I asked for help paying for $50/month medication for my depression and anxiety. Since I was still on his insurance, he'd get 90% of the cost back. He said he couldn't afford it unless I convinced my mom to stop receiving alimony. Not long after, my stepsister asked him for $300 for a tattoo. He handed her the money without hesitation. I walked out and haven't willingly spoken to him since. Years later, he introduced himself to my 6-year-old son at school, even though my son didn't know he existed. That's when I told him if he ever approached my son again, I'd have him arrested. It wasn't the worst abuse out there, but his narcissism left me needing therapy for years. His actions tore me apart and continue to affect me to this day. Story 27. My sister set up a GoFundMe to help our mom with bills during her chemo treatments for multiple myeloma. She raised $10,000 and had the money direct deposited into her account. Then she spent it on a trip to Atlanta, trying to get her daughter on The Voice. When that failed, she partied away the rest. After realizing what she'd done, my mom begged her to pay the money back. My sister signed a contract to do so, but stopped after 3 months. Mom gave her another 3 months before finally pressing charges. The family sided with my sister, calling my mom a horrible person for having her arrested. My mom dropped the charges to avoid being ostracized for the rest of her life. She never saw a penny of that money again. This is why I'll never acknowledge my sister's existence. Story 28. In college, a guy came up with a twisted plan to freak out his clingy girlfriend. He staged a fake shooting by getting a friend to play the role of an angry man with a gun. The shooter used a pump-action air pellet gun in a dorm room, which sounded like real gunfire. The guy taped ketchup packets to his chest, which burst when shot, simulating blood. He collapsed on the bed, pretending to be dead. His girlfriend ran down the hall screaming for help. By the time dorm security and the resident assistant arrived, the guy had cleaned up, changed shirts, and played dumb, claiming she was acting crazy. The girlfriend dropped out and left the school the next day, utterly traumatized. It's one of the cruelest pranks I've ever heard of. Story 29. One of my friend's younger sisters, a 15-year-old girl, was relentlessly bullied at school by a group of boys. They targeted her over her weight and appearance, even though she was a beautiful and normal teenage girl. The constant bullying pushed her to take her own life by jumping in front of a car one night. She died instantly. What happened afterward was even more horrifying. Her bullies went online and created Facebook groups to mock her, her depression, and her suicide. They edited photos of her face onto dead whales with captions like, "Oh no, friend's sister died," and tagged my friend and her family in these posts to taunt them. They even made trolling groups with names like Cut4 Friend's Sister and OMG Get X group banned for bullying friend's sister. The girl's father, devastated and enraged, sent messages threatening the bullies. Instead of showing remorse, the bullies posted screenshots of his messages online saying, "Look how aggressive he is. No wonder friend's sister killed herself." The family was powerless to stop the harassment. At the time, there were no laws against online abuse like this, and they couldn't definitively prove who was behind the accounts. They were forced to endure their daughter's tormentors mocking them until the bullies eventually grew bored and stopped. It's been 10 years since then. Those boys are now in their mid to late 20s, and I sincerely hope the guilt of what they did haunts them every day. It's the only time I've ever truly wished harm on someone. To this day, it's the worst thing I've ever witnessed. Story 30. A buddy of mine had a Tinder date come over to our place a couple of times. I got home late one night and found them chatting in the living room with her baby hanging out nearby. Nothing seemed overtly wrong, though something about her felt off. They went to his room, and she left her baby with me. Thankfully, the baby was asleep, but it was a strange situation. A short while later, my buddy came out saying they didn't hook up because she creeped him out. After that, we didn't hear from her again until a month later. One day, I saw her face in a news article while scrolling through Facebook. It turned out she had left her baby at home alone for 4 days while she went out doing who knows what. The poor baby died of neglect and starvation. It was chilling to think that I had been in the same room as both her and that innocent little boy. Even though I don't like children, the thought of his tiny life being lost because of her neglect still troubles me to this day. I can vividly picture his face, and it's a memory that's hard to shake. She's in prison now where she belongs, but the thought of what happened still lingers even years later. Story 31. My girlfriend in college and I had been dating for a while. I got to know her brother, and he seemed like a genuinely great guy. I even sort of took him under my wing. My girlfriend, though, always seemed a little off, but I didn't understand why at the time. Eventually, she opened up to me about something that had happened in high school. When she was a senior and her brother was a freshman, he got drunk one night, came into her room around 2 a.m., and raped her while she was sleeping. She froze, unable to move or fight back. The next day, she told her parents, and their response was, "No, that didn't happen." They completely dismissed it. Looking back, I wish I'd done more to help her. At the time, I told her to go to therapy, and she did, but I can't help but feel like I could have supported her better. I didn't fully understand how huge of a deal it was. Now at 31, I realized just how immense and devastating it truly was. I still think about it often and feel regret for not being a better partner to her during such a traumatic time. Wherever she is now, I hope she's doing okay. I wish I'd been more mature and capable of providing the help she deserved. Story 32. When my daughters were 1 and 2.5 years old, they were visiting their biological father, who I hesitate to even call their father because he was anything but that. I was heading out of town with my family when he called me, saying that my 1-year-old had gotten into my pills and was throwing up blood. He yelled all sorts of names at me on the phone, but refused to take her to the ER. My dad, a retired police officer, called 911. Emergency services contacted him and ordered him to take her to the hospital, where we would meet him. When we arrived, I noticed there was no blood on her clothes or the car seat, and she was still in the same clothes I had dropped her off in. The hospital staff changed her into a gown and unnecessarily pumped her stomach. I stayed with her while my family went on without me. While we were at the hospital, he called security and falsely claimed I had threatened him. The entire day was a nightmare. I felt terrible for my daughter, who endured something traumatic for no reason. He did it all just to spite me, and for reasons I still don't understand, he faced no consequences. Thankfully, he has no contact with them anymore. My daughters are now 15 and 17, thriving, and we are far removed from that toxic relationship. I'm so grateful we escaped it, but it still haunts me how far he was willing to go to hurt me. Story 33. I've been holding this in for a long time, but my therapist suggested I share it anonymously as a way to process. My cousin, who I once considered one of my best friends, is currently serving a 25-year sentence for the involuntary manslaughter of her 7-year-old daughter, Elle. Depending on whose version of events you believe, Elle was beaten to death either by my cousin or her boyfriend. My cousin A, to maintain anonymity, had a difficult upbringing with an absent father and a resentful single mother. She got pregnant at 16 and struggled to be a good mother. Despite family members being willing and able to raise Elle, A refused to let her go. Instead, she bounced from one toxic relationship to another, choosing men who enabled her self-destruction. I had to distance myself from her, as her behavior became unbearable, but it was hard knowing Elle was caught in the chaos. One spring day, I heard that Elle had been airlifted to a hospital and was unconscious. At first, the story was that she had the flu, but it didn't make sense. A healthy 7-year-old doesn't go into organ failure and die overnight. The truth came out later. Elle was already near death when she arrived at the hospital. The day before, A or her boyfriend had beaten her for over 30 minutes with a blunt object, possibly a fishing pole or table leg. At the time, A, her boyfriend, and Elle were living out of A's car. A and the boyfriend were using drugs while dragging Elle along in their destructive spiral. Elle had been pulled out of school and subjected to unimaginable conditions. After the beating, A told police that Elle cried all night and wheezed until the next day, when she became unresponsive. Instead of calling 911, A drove around town, texting friends for advice and stopping for coffee, trying to figure out how to cover her tracks. By the time they reached the hospital, it was far too late. This loss was devastating. I loved Elle as if she were my own child. Losing her in such a violent and senseless way shattered me. It's horrifying to know that someone I once loved like a sister was capable of such cruelty. A is where she deserves to be, but that doesn't undo the pain she caused. What's even more chilling is that she has shown almost no remorse. If you've made it this far, thank you for reading. Hug the children in your life a little tighter. This experience has forever changed how I view the world. Story 34. My friend's ex was manipulative and abusive. He constantly used her past trauma, being assaulted by her father at the age of 5, to control her. I have her permission to share this. He threatened to harm himself if she ever left him, forced her to send nudes even though she wasn't comfortable, and made her block her friends, including me. Luckily, I reached out to her through a second account to stay in touch. He blamed her for everything, made her harm herself, and caused her to become paranoid. He even pressured her to stop eating to lose weight and cheated on her constantly. At one point, he tried grooming her, but I intervened since she couldn't even handle being touched due to her trauma. He stalked her and once tried to get into her home, but thankfully, I was there waiting for her, and he failed. After 2 years of fighting to get her away from him, she finally blocked him and got a restraining order. She only stayed with him for so long because her family wasn't supportive and she was desperate for love. I hope that vile person gets the karma he deserves. Story 35. I went to school with a kid whose dad owned a successful bakery. The dad had a business partner who was secretly stealing money. One night, the situation escalated at the dad's house, and the business partner shot him before turning the gun on himself. The family was devastated. The mom sold the house for cheap and moved away. Around the same time, my aunt and uncle were house hunting. They bought that house because it was such a bargain, even though it was a murder house. When they first visited the house, there was still blood everywhere, which is chilling to think about. Despite its dark history, my aunt and uncle made it into a lovely home. No hauntings, as far as I know. Years later, one of my cousin's friends, who was studying law enforcement, watched a crime scene video in class. It was a walkthrough of a murder scene, and it turned out to be the house my aunt and uncle had bought. Small world. Story 36. A guy and a girl were in a relationship for a while and had a child together. After they broke up, they shared custody of their child, who was about 5 or 6 when the girl started dating the guy's best and oldest friend. A few months into the new relationship, the mom skipped town with the best friend and stopped taking care of her responsibilities, including taking their child to speech therapy lessons. For almost a year, the dad handled everything on his own. He filed for sole custody, which he won. Not only because the mom didn't show up to contest it, but also because her own parents testified in his favor. The best friend began complaining that no one wanted to hang out with him anymore or invite him anywhere. A few weeks later, the mom resurfaced with the best friend to announce they were expecting a child together, completely ignoring the one she had abandoned. To this day, the best friend acts clueless about why everyone is upset with him. This story was supposed to highlight the betrayal by the best friend, but typing it out, the mom comes across as even worse. A terrible situation all around. Super trashy. Story 37. When I was about 16, my friend's brother Josh decided to take 5 hits of acid. It hit him hard. At some point, he stripped down to just a t-shirt and his underwear, got into his parents' car, and locked the doors. He became convinced that he was trapped inside and started panicking. Determined to escape, he managed to force the wing window open, scraped and bloodied himself squeezing through the small opening, and finally escaped. From there, Josh walked to a small grocery store nearby, holding what he thought was a 2-tailed snake that he had found in a cave. In reality, it was a purse strap he had picked up somewhere. He confidently went into the store and slammed the snake on the counter, announcing he wanted to trade it for a pack of Marlboro Reds. The cashier, obviously baffled, refused. Undeterred, Josh calmly reached into the front of his underwear, pulled out $3, and bought the smokes. He left the store without even noticing us. We had followed him, high on weed and laughing the whole time. Back at home, we spent the night smoking weed and playing video games while Josh entertained us with stories about the lady with a hole in her head who lived in the bathroom closet. According to him, she came out while he was in there and traded him another pack of smokes for the two-tailed snake. To this day, we have no idea how he ended up with that second pack of cigarettes. Story 38. I used to live in a rough suburb where all kinds of wild things happened. One sunny day, I was outside a corner shop smoking weed with some friends and a few other crews. Everyone was drinking or doing other drugs when an older guy came over carrying 2 trays of beer, 48 cans, and said he had a problem. His son, who was about 16 and hanging out with us, listened as the old man explained that his daughter's boyfriend had been beating her. Because of some clan or family feud rules, the father couldn't handle the situation himself, so he offered us the beer and an old car from his garden if we would rough him up discreetly. He held out the car keys as an incentive. Before any of us could react, his son shouted, "For F's sake, da, I'll do it." He grabbed the keys and bolted toward the house. Naturally, we followed to see what would happen. What unfolded next was absolute chaos. The son ran into the house, and we heard banging, smashing, and shouting. He eventually emerged, dragging the boyfriend by his hair. He bashed the guy's head against the house wall several times, kicked him repeatedly in the face, and then dragged him to the car. In one of the most shocking moments I've ever witnessed, he shoved the boyfriend's head under the back wheel, got in the car, started the engine, and repeatedly reversed and drove forward over the guy. He then sped off, leaving us all stunned. Somehow the boyfriend survived. We didn't see the son again for a while. Turns out he was arrested on the other side of the country not long after. That was one of the wildest afternoons I've ever experienced. Story 39. A man I know brainwashed his wife into traveling, while pregnant, to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan for humanitarian reasons. He had converted to Islam a few years prior and had been deeply involved in a previous wife's family, which included a convicted terrorist, acting as their mouthpiece for legal matters. This new wife was convinced to accompany him despite the obvious dangers. Once in Afghanistan, they were kidnapped by Haqqani terrorists and held hostage for 5 years. During their captivity, the man fathered 2 more children with his wife, all while they were being moved between locations. Eventually, Pakistani special forces rescued them. However, when offered transport by U.S. forces, he refused because the flight would land in the U.S. instead of Canada. He made his family wait for Canadian transport. Back in Canada, things seemed fine at first, and he even met the Prime Minister. But it all unraveled when his wife fled from him, screaming, and reported to the police how he had abused her throughout their captivity and back home. She described how he constantly threatened to kill her, including threats to burn her alive in the shower. This man's actions, both before and after captivity, make this one of the most disturbing situations I've ever heard of. Story 40. He was a groomsman in a wedding where I was a bridesmaid. After the reception, we were all sitting around a fire, having a good time, and his girlfriend was chatting with my husband. She was a little drunk, but fine. He, however, started getting annoyed with her and decided it was time for her to go to bed. To speed things up, he began pretending to take shots of whiskey with her, but was actually drinking beer instead. After 3 shots, she was too drunk to stay awake, and he started rounding up friends to help carry her to bed. She kicked and screamed the entire way, while he loudly mocked her for being a lightweight and an embarrassment. The next morning at breakfast, he continued berating her, making everyone uncomfortable. My husband and I spoke to her privately and told her his behavior wasn't okay and that we were there for her if she needed help. But the whole situation left us wondering, if he treated his longtime girlfriend like that in public, how did he act when they were alone? Or worse, when he was single and trying to pursue other women? Story 41. I worked with a girl who started dating a shy, awkward guy at our workplace, his first girlfriend ever. She, however, was known for being a toxic person and had already slept with 3 other coworkers, one of whom later turned out to have actually assaulted a 12-year-old. She also gave all 3 of those guys gonorrhea. The shy guy lived with another coworker whose girlfriend was also difficult, though not nearly as bad as this girl. Both women forced their way into the apartment's dynamic, and within a month, all 4 of them hated each other. The apartment was in the second guy's name, so the shy guy had to move out. His girlfriend insisted they get a new apartment in her name because she had a better credit score. He used his savings to pay the security deposit and the first month's rent. As soon as he handed over the payment, she broke up with him via text. She didn't even come to get her things herself. Instead, she sent a group of guys she was likely sleeping with to retrieve her belongings. She was just an all-around awful person. My girlfriend lived in a university dorm, and even though this girl wasn't a student, I often saw her there hanging out with random guys while she was still dating the shy coworker. She seemed to thrive on chaos and manipulation. Story 42. I made friends with a group of people at a cafe, and it turned out they were all in town for a friend's wedding in a few days. The bride and groom were kind enough to invite me, so I went. At the reception, I was seated with the couple's closest friends, and the topic of worst first date experiences came up. One girl, Katie, shared a story that she thought was funny, but left me horrified. She said she had been dating a guy, and they had planned a group camping trip together. Before the trip, they broke up, but she decided to go on the trip solo anyway. When she arrived, she discovered her ex had brought his new girlfriend, Moon. That night, out of spite, Katie snuck over to Moon's tent and peed on it while Moon was asleep inside. Everyone at the table erupted in laughter, congratulating Katie for her bold move, while I sat there absolutely horrified. I quickly realized I wanted nothing to do with these people, and never stayed in touch with them after that. Story 43. When my parents got married, my dad, who is Chinese, wanted to make a good impression on my mom's family. My mom's parents and siblings were planning to open a bar, and my dad generously gifted them a significant portion of his savings to help with their startup costs. He believed in the importance of family helping family, as is common in Chinese culture. Despite his financial support and background in business, he now helps merge and start companies. They dismissed all his advice. Whenever he voiced concerns or tried to help, they told him, "Shush, foreigner, this is how we do it in America." Unsurprisingly, the family had no idea how to run a business. They made poor investments, hired a manager who stole from them, and the business failed, leaving them in significant debt. Instead of taking accountability, they blamed my dad, using racial slurs and claiming it was his fault for giving them the money, as it put too much pressure on them. Years later, I found out they spread a rumor to all my cousins that my dad made his money by being involved with the mafia. One summer, my brother was asked by our cousins if our dad was in the mob. When he denied it, they responded, "How else does a Chinese man make money?" Story 44. Straight up murder. A former friend of mine, Jordan, was a quiet, shy kid growing up. He usually tagged along with others rather than being the center of attention. That all changed when he discovered steroids and toxic gym culture at 19. Within months, he transformed into a raging narcissist. He started beating up random people after clubbing and even assaulted women who rejected him. Fast forward 5 years, Jordan was working in the oil fields and had developed severe drug and alcohol addictions. During a layoff period, he convinced an old high school friend, who had been clean from addiction, to go on a drinking bender with him, persuading him it would be just one last time. On their way to a friend's house, Jordan drove his pickup truck at 120 kph, 75 miles per hour, in a 50 kphe, 30 miles per hour, zone. He lost control on a curve, overcorrected, and the truck rolled off the road, crashing 100 meters through grass and into a condo building. The truck came to a stop in someone's living room. Jordan's friend was pronounced dead at the scene with a blood alcohol level of 0.26. Jordan survived the crash but died 5 days later from his injuries. I hope those were the most excruciating 5 days of his life. For the lives he ruined and the chaos he caused, it was nothing less than he deserved. Story 45. About 14 years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I had a group of friends that included a mix of super wealthy people, like wealth on a level I had never seen before, and some well-off but deeply messed up individuals. Among them was this incredibly attractive guy, a 10-tenths who made every girl swoon. He came from a good middle-class family but wasn't rich. This guy was a total piece of garbage, though, and had no ambition other than to marry a rich girl so he'd never have to work. Within this group of friends was a woman who was super wealthy. Her parents owned a company everyone would recognize. Together, they devised a plan. They would get married so her family would give them a massive lump sum as a wedding gift and buy them a house. The plan worked, and the family delivered on both counts. But then one day, she came home to find that he was gone. He'd cleaned out their bank account and disappeared. He literally vanished without a trace, taking every dime with him. To this day, no one in that group has seen or heard from him again. The whole thing was mind-blowing and left everyone reeling. Story 46. I once attended a party for a newly married hippie couple at a rented house on South Padre Island. Everyone there was tripping on acid or mushrooms, except for me. I'd been asked to take photos, so I stayed sober. One guy at the party was off to himself, visibly distressed. Concerned, I went to check on him. He kept muttering about how he was going to hell. When I asked why, he said it was because he was gay. Trying to reassure him, I told him religion was a human construct and that being gay wasn't something that would condemn him. I jokingly added, "It's not like you're a serial killer." He gave me a hard look, then confessed something truly horrifying. He said he had been diagnosed with full-blown AIDS and decided not to take medication, allowing his viral load to remain high. For years, he had used Grindr, Craigslist, and ass parties to have unprotected ass with as many men as possible, sometimes 3 in a single day, with the goal of infecting them. He targeted younger men, wanting to infect them early in their lives. By his estimate, he had likely spread the virus to nearly 1,000 people across multiple cities. Shocked, I told the host what he had shared, but I never caught his name and never saw him again. To this day, I have no idea what happened to him. Story 47. I was part of a trio of friends who had known each other since junior high. The other two, Mark and Tom, married identical twins. While I was in college, Mark began coming with me to parties, picking up women, and casually cheating on his wife. His behavior disgusted me, so I distanced myself. A year later, Tom's wife, Jill, had a massive breakdown and confessed that Mark had been raping her for 5 years. Mark would come over early when Tom wasn't home, assault her, and then casually hang out and drink beer while waiting for Tom to return. He threatened to kill her and everyone else if she ever told anyone. His cold, calculated behavior convinced her he was capable of following through. When the truth came out, the police refused to investigate, claiming there wasn't enough evidence. I started digging and found out Mark had raped one of my ex-girlfriends and attempted to assault another. One of them warned me that he was obsessed with me, which was chilling. It also came to light that Mark had molested Tom's younger sister years earlier. Mark manipulated the divorce process to financially ruin his wife, despite her putting him through college. He declared bankruptcy, stuck her with the bills, and walked away unscathed. He remained free, thanks to the lack of legal action. I offered to help Tom handle the situation privately, but he chose to take the high road. Looking back, I'm glad we didn't act, but the lack of justice still haunts me. This isn't even the worst thing I've experienced, but it's the most direct connection I've had to such evil. Story 48. A friend of mine had an arranged marriage with a woman who seemed sweet and innocent at first. His family wasn't wealthy, and he was the sole breadwinner after his father passed away while he was in college. He paid for most of the wedding himself. After the marriage, she began complaining about their living situation, saying she wanted her own house and a car, even though her family was worse off financially than his. One day, after an argument, she went to visit her parents. Soon after, my friend received a call from her relatives accusing him of abuse. She lied, claiming he beat her and demanded dowry. Her family threatened to sue him unless he met their demands, which included moving near her sister's house and other unreasonable conditions. Refusing to give in, my friend demanded a divorce. Her family then demanded $500K to settle the matter out of court. Knowing the judiciary process could drag on for years, he eventually settled for $200K to avoid the ordeal. Later, he found out that her family had a terrible reputation, with rumors of the women prostituting themselves and using wealthier men for money. She had apparently dated several rich boyfriends before their marriage, exploiting each one financially. The whole situation was a nightmare, and it taught him a hard lesson about thoroughly researching a potential spouse, especially in an arranged marriage.